Well, as I mentioned, the left's obsession with abortion has stalled efforts to finalize the National Defense Authorization Act. You'll remember that following the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022, the Biden administration issued a policy unilaterally that has the Department of Defense funding abortion travel for service members, which both violates the law and it injects the abortion agenda into national defense policy. Well, in July, the House passed its version of the National Defense Authorization Act, which includes the Jackson-Roy Amendment, which rolls back the Pentagon's illegal abortion policy. And the NDAA, passed by the Democratic-controlled Senate, does not include such language. And both sides are in conference today to hammer out a final agreement. The question is, will the Jackson-Roy language survive these negotiations? Joining me now to discuss this, Congressman Chip Roy, who serves on the House Judiciary Committee, the House Budget Committee, and the House Rules Committee. He represents the 21st Congressional District of Texas. Congressman Roy, welcome back to the program.
Great to be on, Tony. I hope you had a blessed Thanksgiving, and I hope you're doing well.
I did. It's always nice to be out of D.C. and with family. But it's back to work. I was on the Hill. I know you've been busy today with the Rules Committee. I had a conversation with the Speaker, and it sounds as if the House is standing pretty firm on this no taxpayer funding to facilitate abortion.
Well, I know that is certainly my position. It's certainly the position of the Freedom Caucus, and I hope it'll continue to be. I hope the position of the Speaker. To be clear, as you just explained to all of your listeners, the position of the current administration, the Biden administration, has been to expand, contrary to law, the ability of members of the military, the Department of Defense, to travel to go get abortions all at taxpayer expense, take days off, and all using taxpayer dollars. Well, that is against the law, and of course, it's a can you hear me, Tony?
Yeah, you just dropped out there for a minute. Keep going.
Okay, sorry. And so we worked, as you said, in July to pass in the National Defense Authorization Act limits on that to constrain the abuse of the law by the Biden administration. And unfortunately, they're trying to ignore that in the Senate. They're not even in conference. Right? When you were in Congress, we actually went to conference committee. We're not even doing that. My friend Scott Perry is a conferee. He's not gone to any conference yet. What's happening right now is that Chuck Schumer and some of the Republicans in the Senate are trying to pregame out a compromise on this to water it down, take out the abortion protections, take out the transgender surgeries restrictions, take out the critical race theory and DEI stuff that we put in there to limit the abuses and the woke stuff. And they want to add a 32-day extension of FISA on there, which is, against our own civil liberties in terms of the abuses over at the DOJ and our intelligence.
Well, first off,
so
what does that have?
Stop that.
What does that have to do with the National Defense Authorization Act?
Nothing. And that flies in the face of everything we tried to do last year to get back to single subject bills, focus on our work in regular order. And so we believe we ought to take up the NDAA.
That should be a non-starter.
100%. We're in complete agreement. It ought to be a non-starter that we water down all of those great provisions, and it ought to be a non-starter that we add the FISA provision.
Well, that's in a clear violation of what the Republicans agreed to at the beginning of this Congress, that you were going to deal with single-issue measures.
That's exactly right, Tony. And so I'm hopeful that the Speaker, and obviously he's a good friend of mine and a good friend of yours, I'm hopeful that the Speaker will adhere to those agreements that we made in January and force the Senate to do their job. We can take up FISA by itself. We can take up the NDAA by itself, but we need to do it through the conference committee, through regular order, and we need to make sure that we're fighting to defend the House's position. We passed a good bill.
It was a very good bill.
So let's go.
In fact, it was one of the best NDAAs that I've seen in almost 20 years. So it was a very good bill.
Correct.
So I want to go to this issue. I'm going to focus on the abortion issue one, because that's one of the issues in the Senate where Senator Tuberville, who's been on the program a lot, a good friend of yours, who has said, look, I'm putting a pause, a hold on promotions. You're going to have to vote on them one at a time because of this unilateral change in the abortion funding, abortion travel for the military. Is this not the off-ramp they've been looking at? Just adopt the NDAA as passed by the House that addresses this issue? This takes care of the promotion issue as well?
100%. And let's be clear to everyone out there listening. Coach Tuberville deserves praise for having the courage to stand up and try to stand for the non-taxpayer funding of abortion and abortion tourism. I wish more of his Senate colleagues were standing alongside him. I want to be very clear. There are a lot of senators who run as pro-life senators who are not standing with Coach Tuberville and who are all too happy to move an NDAA that removes our protection for life. You're exactly right. This is the off-ramp they'd be looking for. I stand with Coach Tuberville. I believe that we ought to have a defense that is focused on defending the United States, not social engineering and not funding abortion tourism.
Agreed. I mean, especially when we see how volatile the world is right now, we should be focused on one thing when it comes to our military. That is having a force that is lethal, that is prepared to defend this country. And all of this DEI, abortion, travel, all of this stuff is a distraction. Just what Israel was doing, Israel was distracted when they were attacked by Hamas.
Yep.
If we're not careful with an open southern border, focused on all this other stuff, we're not going to be prepared when we're attacked.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And not to jump ahead a segment that you're going to have, I was there at the press conference with Mike Braun, who I think you're going to have on, with Rick Scott. You played a clip. We talked about spending. We talked about issues like the NDAA, like you just described, but we also talked about the border. And I hope that there's no circumstance in which we will bring to the floor of the House anything for Ukraine until we've done what we are supposed to do to defend the border of the United States. And that means passing H.R. 2 out of the Senate, Joe Biden signing it into law, attaching metrics to it. If any dollar flows to Ukraine, it must come after the border to the United States is secure, and only then if it's transparent and mission focused. So we're going to stand on that wall defending what the American people sent us here to do. I get thanked all the time in Texas. I don't often get thanked in Congress, and that's exactly the way it ought to be.
You're there to represent your constituents back in Texas, who I'm sure are very much in line with your positions, or you're in line with theirs. And by the way, we're going to help on this NDAA. The Family Research Council's announced that we're going to score this. And in fact, I told the Speaker that today, that we're going to score this measure if the House language on ending this abortion travel is taken out. There's no reason. This is a 60, 65, 70% issue across the board in America. We do not believe taxpayer money should go to fund abortion.
No, and Tony, this is really important, right? We won a major victory for life. It's not a political victory. It's a victory for life last summer through all of our works for the last 50 years to overturn Roe, because it's the right legal result and the right result for life. But right now, we should be doing everything we can to win minds and hearts. And I know that the vast majority of the American people, regardless of where they fall on the spectrum on abortion and different beliefs about it at birth or at 6 weeks or 15 weeks, right, the fact is they don't want taxpayer funding. They want us to stay focused on a military doing its job. So let's pull all that out. It's Democrats who want to politicize our defense. Well, and we're the ones who want to get it focused on its job.
But I want to just for a moment, we're almost out of time here, but you mentioned the Republicans. There are some Republicans in the Senate that will not take a definitive stand on this, and they're the ones that are saying, a lot of them, after the Roe decision, after Roe was turned, the Dobbs decision, Roe overturned, that, well, the government doesn't have a role in this. The federal government doesn't have a role. It certainly does have a role when it comes to the funding of abortion. It should not be doing it. That's beyond question.
And it has been a core principle for decades with respect to the Hyde Amendment and, generally speaking, with the defense, that we not do that. And Democrats are complaining that we're the ones injecting, social issues into this. No, they're the ones that injected cultural and social issues. And Coach Tuberville stood up. We stood up in the House. And dadgummit, the Senate needs to stand up. And I hope that Speaker Johnson will help us hold the line with the House-passed bill from July.
Well, we're with you. Agree 100%. Chip Roy, always great to see you. Thanks for fighting a good fight.